Level 1. The Thief. She was never your enemy, but tonight she has something that doesn't belong to her, and you have been sent to take it back. The city breathes around you. Distant bells, a dog somewhere that won't stop, lamplight from the upper floors of the merchant's house spilling orange onto wet cobblestones below. You stand in the gap between two buildings and watch. One breath in, one breath out. Your fingers rest against the wall behind you, reading it. Cold stone, steady, something that doesn't move. You've been in this position before. Different cities, different rooftops, different rain. Same weight in your stomach you've learned to call focus instead of fear. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning. You are 8 years old. The docks smell like fish and low tide and rope that has been wet too many times. Your mother is not coming back. You understood this before the man at the harbor office said it out loud. You understood it the way children understand things before they have words for them. In the stomach, in the chest, in the sudden heaviness of your own hands. The man gave you a piece of bread and pointed you toward the street. That was the last time anyone pointed you anywhere out of kindness. The city taught you everything after that. Not gently, not with patience. The city doesn't care if you learn or not. It only clears space for those who do and fills it with those who don't. The first lesson was invisibility. Not the kind from stories, not disappearing, just becoming the kind of person no one looks at twice. A child near a market stall, a shadow near a doorway. Someone who belongs wherever they happen to be standing. You practiced without knowing you were practicing. You watched faces. You watched eyes. You learned where people's attention went when they were distracted and where it never went at all. The corners, the low places, the spaces between things. The second lesson was patience. Most people cannot wait. They shift their weight, check over their shoulder, breathe too loudly, give themselves away by wanting something too much. You learn to want nothing, or to want it so quietly that the wanting made no sound. You could stand near a baker's stall for an hour and never once look at the bread directly. Look at the baker. Look at the crowd. Look at the gap that opens and closes and opens again. Wait for the right gap. Then move. You weren't cruel about it. That was the thing you told yourself. You took what you needed and stopped. You didn't take from people who would notice it hard. The woman with the thin coat and the careful hands. The old man counting his coins twice. You had rules. Unwritten, unspoken, but rules. And rules, even badly made ones, are the beginning of a self. At 10, you fell in with a group. Not a gang, nothing so organized. Just a handful of children who slept under the same broken eave and shared food without being asked and understood each other without explanation. There was a boy named Rocco who could pick any lock in the city and laughed like he was surprised every time it worked. A girl named Sia who never spoke but always knew which way to run before anyone else did. And an older girl, 13 to your 10, who went by a name no one had given her. She had chosen it herself, Marin. Marin was the one who saw you. Not saw you the way people see a child near a stall. Saw you. She watched you work the market square one afternoon from across the street and afterwards said, without preamble, without looking at you directly, "You're wasting it." You asked what? She said, "Whatever that is that you have." You didn't know what to do with that. You carried it for weeks. The idea that there was something you had, that it was capable of being wasted. She started teaching you the following month. Not sitting down teaching. Walking, teaching. Doing teaching. Move here. No, not like that. Like you mean to be here. Feel the weight shift before you shift it. Your hands know things your eyes don't. Trust your hands. You learn to read a room by walking through it once. Who was nervous and who was bored, and who was watching other people the way you were watching them. You learned to carry things you hadn't paid for in the same hands you carried things you had. The crime is in the gesture, she said. Make no gesture. She had a way of testing you without telling you it was a test. She'd take you to a crowded square and say nothing and walk away. An hour later, she'd find you somewhere else and ask what you remembered. Not what you took, what you remembered. The man with the green coat who kept touching his left hip where a wallet was, the woman with the basket who had argued with someone recently, you could see it in how she held her jaw. The guard at the gate who was tired and had been tired for months. You learned to read people the way other children learn to read letters, one careful shape at a time until the words came whole. At 13, you made your first real mistake. A merchant's house, East Quarter. You went too fast. You had the thing in your hand, and you were almost to the window when the door opened and a woman stood there with a candle. She was old. Her hand shook. She looked at you with an expression that was not fear and was not anger and was something you didn't have a name for yet. You could have run. The window was close, but her hands were shaking and she was old, and you thought about your mother and you set the thing down on the table and walked out through the door she was still holding open. She didn't speak. Neither did you. You went back to the eave and lay on your back and stared at the broken wood above you and felt something you also didn't have a name for. Not regret, exactly. More like the feeling of a close call with yourself. Marin asked no questions when you came back empty-handed. She slid over on the broken boards and made room, and that was that. At 15, Rocco was caught. Not by the city guard, by someone private, someone who worked for a merchant family and did not follow the same rules as the guard. You never saw Rocco again. Sia disappeared the following winter without a word, the way some people do when the city finally gets into them too deep. Marin left for a port city to the south, where she said there was more room and less history. She said you could come. You said you'd think about it. You didn't go. You don't know why. Something held you here. Maybe the familiarity of these particular streets, the way you had memorized every alley and shortcut and rooftop between the harbor and the old market wall. Maybe because leaving felt like admitting the city had beaten you out of it. Maybe because you didn't know who you were without these specific shadows to move in. You kept working alone. You got better and also more careful, which is the same thing over time. You took contracts for the first time at 17. Individuals who needed things retrieved, things taken, things moved from one place to another without official routes. You had rules about those too. You didn't take contracts that ended in violence. You didn't take contracts aimed at people who had nothing. You didn't ask questions whose answers would change your mind. That last rule was the most dishonest one, and you knew it. At 19, you were hired by a woman who gave no name to retrieve a leather case from a house in the upper quarter. You did not ask what was in it. You moved through the house with the ease that years of practice give. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Found the case in the room she had described, had it in your hands. Then you heard a sound. From the floor above. A child. Not crying. Laughing. That particular bright sound that has no performance in it. Purely itself. You stood in the dark with the case in your hands and listened to it. You finished the job. You delivered the case. You were paid. But that sound stayed in you somewhere. The way certain things do. Unbidden and unasked for. Finding a crack you didn't know was there and settling in like weather. You began, without deciding to wonder about the people whose spaces you moved through. What they were in the middle of. What they were afraid of. What the object you had taken meant to them, not to the person who sent you. You tried to stop wondering. It was bad for the work, but the wondering wouldn't stop. By 23, your name meant something in certain circles. Not a famous name, not a loud name, the right kind of name, the kind said quietly when someone needed something done exactly right by someone who would not be seen and would not be spoken of after. You were good at it. You knew you were good at it. That knowledge sat in you like a smooth stone. Not warm, not cold, just there. Real in a way that few other things were. One evening between jobs, sitting on a rooftop above the harbor, watching ships come in from places you had never been, you thought about Marin. What she had seen in you that afternoon across the market square. Whatever that is that you have. You still didn't have a word for it. Not skill exactly. Not nerve. Something underneath both. Something that had been there before anyone named it or shaped it or aimed it at anything. You wondered what it would have been had your mother come back. Had there been a gate and an old man and a broom pointing somewhere different. You didn't wonder for long. That kind of wondering goes nowhere useful. The city murmured below you. Fires in the low quarters. Lanterns along the harbor road. 1,000 lives all moving at once inside their own necessities. Not knowing you were above them and not needing to. You watched until the cold drove you inside. and then you went back to work.